the other one, you bastard!
I don't think I've ever discussed it on this channel, but not every Iron Factory figure has been an absolute winner. Granted, there are more hits than there are misses, but amongst the lineup, well, there are a couple of stinkers. Everyone knows how bad the original Soundwave / Blaster / Perceptor mold is, but that was made at the beginning of the company's lifespan, so you can't really give it that much flack. Same can't be said for the Drift / Deadlock mold though, because thanks to the awful alt mode, f*** that! But what about their modern releases? All of them have to be pristine, don't they? Well, there is one figure that I feel gets a little bit too much leeway within today's market. Now, granted, it doesn't get very much praise either, just being a middling release, but I feel it's important to take a look at it and just show what's so flawed about it, because it is quite interesting. Greetings Cybertronians, I'm Dr. Lockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to Iron Factory EX37 Phantom, also known to you and I as Mirage. Now, unlike my previously reviewed Hound, Mirage did actually have a slightly more prominent role in the 2005 run of IDW. Well, at least he did until you know. Now, my knowledge of IDW remains as limited as it has been for a good long while, so whilst I know that the robot mode is remaining loyal to the page model, the vehicle mode I'm not so sure. So, from an outsider's perspective, the vehicle mode is a giant space oblong. I'm sorry, but this is just not a good design, whether original or not. It's not an awful one, but it's clear that they were limited in some capacity. Now, I have to give credit where credit is due. Mirage is probably one of the hardest carbots to get right, considering pretty much every rendition has been an extremely limber fellow, and the original toy was, well, not that. Also, the original toy had a nasty habit of snapping in half, so good luck with the engineering. There have been varying degrees of success over the years, and this Mirage takes a nosedive into the lower end of the spectrum. Right off the bat, the design is extremely cluttered, even if you can tell they tried their best to make it the opposite. The front section makes an attempt to echo the thinned out race car that is known for being, but in an IDW style. However, due to the hinges that the wheels sit on, it ends up looking way chunkier than it should. I like that they included clear blue plastic, but everything around it is a mess. These vents on the side just don't blend with the design at all, and the backpack hinge is super obvious. Complain all you like about Mech Fans Toys Blitzwing, but I think this is worse. Like, I get that it's required for transformation, but it'd have to be super obvious? Then you've got the arms peeking through, and although they've tried to cover it up with these side panels, it just fails immensely. As such, you end up with these random panels on the side that only exist for the robot mode, which would be fine in itself, but the way they taper off is incredibly ugly. I mean, I guess I'm glad the back section looks passable, even if it's immensely bulky. And yeah, the spoiler, which is formed from the feet, is alright, I guess, but there's basically been no attempt to cover up the back. On its own, that effect isn't that big of an issue at this size, but considering that every other Iron Factory car gets this right, it is really disappointing. Hell, Hound, who I just reviewed, managed to cover it up. Why did it end up this way? When the Siege version, which is awful by the way, ends up looking way better in vehicle mode, then clearly something went wrong along the way. I realize some of the earlier Iron Factory figures had even worse vehicle modes, but compared to the figures with a higher level of quality that they release these days, it just doesn't hold up. That's not to say I hate absolutely everything with this vehicle mode. The font they chose is quite aesthetically pleasing, and the use of tamper graphs is expertly clean. Yeah, some sticklers might complain about using Gitane instead of Citans, but not everyone can be as ballsy as Toy World. I also really like the use of rubber. It feels very durable, and doesn't pop off easily. As a result, in combination with the pinned wheels, he probably rolls the best out of any Iron Factory figure, which is kind of fitting for his design. This feels like a design that they put a shit ton of effort into, and for that I really commend them. With a lot of bad Transformers, it feels like they really didn't care and just fumbled through the production process. Mirage is unique amongst bad transforming figures in the sense that he feels like the designers desperately tried to make it work, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, they just weren't able to. He's sculpted amazingly, but the overall design betrays such work. He's painted to the highest degree, but due to poor kibble, the choices seem baffling. Nothing about this figure feels lazy, nor does it feel amateurish, it just feels clumsy. And for a company with such a high standard of figure design, this is a real shame. Can't say the same for the weapons though, they're as lazy as can be. You've got a rifle and a rocket launcher, and this time they are very much inspired by the original G1 design. But the storage is pretty half-assed, with them combining in a very unconvincing way and the whole thing just pegging on the top. I suppose I should be thankful that they even included such a feature to begin with, but as far as storage options go, even by Iron Factory standards, this is pretty piss poor. The gun doesn't even sit flush across the vehicle mode, which would have been such an easy fix. The rest of the figure is bad, but in a way where I can understand the intent behind the designers. This is just stupid. Although I suppose in the end that's such a minor issue compared to everything else, which is ironic considering my thoughts on each circumstance. But anyway, moving on. Size-wise, he's a bit of a chunky fella, and I'm no scale nut, but even so I feel this doesn't really fit the character. But putting that aside, to truly be a bad figure, having a subpar vehicle mode isn't enough to push it into disappointing territory. Much like Hound before him, the true test of a figure's worth lies beyond, and for that, Well, I am not looking forward to this. On paper, this transformation seems really simple and easy to go through, but in practice, it's an exercise in frustration due to terrible tolerances and terrible clearances. It's just a mess. However, it doesn't start out that way. The first thing you want to do is take these and bring them out a little bit, and you'll notice there's a sort of double hinge section here, which rotates in and clips into place there. Very simple, very easy, and then you bring the wheels around like so to complete the heel spurs. I'll show you why that's a bad idea later on. So, starts off promising, but it quickly gets real bad. Rotate the waist 180 degrees, and then the arms transform. Now, what's supposed to happen is, you untab this, rotate it down, untab the side panel, then rotate this 180 degrees and fold out the arm. That's how it's supposed to work, that's how it's supposed to fit. But you try with the other, oh dear. Yeah, one thing with this, you've got hard plastic on hard plastic, two of the same types of hard plastic making a ball joint, and that's a bit of a bad idea. These are designed in such a way where these will eventually pop off, and when they do, they slowly start to lose their suction. And that means that eventually you're going to get to a point where you physically can't transform these without both of the arms falling off. In fact, as I've been reviewing this arm has started to fall off far more frequently as well. So yeah, this is a ticking time bomb in terms of how the shoulders are working. And it is a very, very bad omen for a figure. One thing many people don't consider is longevity in a design. A figure has to hold up for a good long while. It's a toy, it's not just some one and done disposable cheap KO you find at a dollar store. This is an expensive collectible item, and if it can't hold up between multiple transformations, well, it's f***ing failed. But let's be honest, the rest ain't great either. You untab the chest from there and bring both this panel down and this panel down. You untab these sections and rotate them around. That'll allow you to take the chest and bring it forward. Come into the chest and fold these panels into the midriff. You got a double hinge here that rotates slightly into there. You sort of separate the wheel sections from the torso section, but be careful that the arm doesn't fall off because it's fallen off in other takes. And then you kind of just mush the chest into place like so. You come around and just push the clear part up, not these two. Rotate these side sections inwards just a bit. These do not fold down, they only fold up and around, so you just want to go up and around, so that they shift a little bit back. Then they fold down into the backpack, and you're thankfully done. So yeah, on paper this should not be difficult. It's an incredibly simple conversion in terms of steps. There aren't that many steps. The steps should work properly, but it just flat out doesn't, and it becomes the most frustrating Iron Factory conversion I've ever witnessed. Like, Jesus, this is just a horrible transformation, hands down. So after a long and frustrating transformation that I quite frankly never want to do again, not out of complexity but out of ridiculous levels of bullshit, the robot mode is slightly below average. Honestly, it's not as bad as the vehicle mode, let alone the transformation, but either way it doesn't feel worth the slog we just went through. First though, the good. They at least managed to nail the silhouettes, despite being made slightly chunkier than normal by necessity of the overall Iron Factory design philosophy. In the words of IGN, it definitely makes you feel like Mirage. Just a little tubbier. The chest is practically perfect, and the red paint peeking through does wonders. Could have used another coat, but for what it is, it's done quite well. The paintwork on the legs that looks like patchwork in the vehicle mode finally comes into its own and develops into a really well-realized flowing system. I'm even starting to notice details I never saw earlier, such as the silver on the sides. You've even got extra silver that pops out from the forearms, which is a very smart touch, as it would have looked bland otherwise. Unfortunately, a lot of this goodwill is just bogged down by problematic engineering. For starters, this guy can't stand for shit. It just doesn't work. Heel spurs are always a good idea, but wheel spurs? Who the f thought that was a good idea? Oh yeah, sure, just put the loosest part in charge of maintaining a solid stance. Are you out of your mind? And sure, you can give him a stand to help him maintain some of the more wacky poses, but I don't know, more and more Legends companies are including stands with their figures these days. The fact they don't include one out of the box when he's this badly balanced, it's incredibly misguided. It also makes the legs look extremely unfinished, since that's where the wheels fold out from. There had to be enough budget to add some extra paint. This can't have been all they could do. The forearms are fine, but the black shoulders end up blending into the massive kibble behind them, which makes the side panels look like they're just floating there. Also on my copy, they never glued the right one in properly, so it just pops off almost as easily as the left arm. The backpack is a mess. If I'm being completely honest, I'd rather they just have given him larger chunks of consistent kibble than having all these parts flopping about. Under normal circumstances, sure, this is a Legends figure and you have to cut it some slack, but when you consider the nightmarish transformation you have to go through to get here, the goodwill quickly dries up even further. Besides, this is Iron Factory. They practically made third-party Legends what it is today. There should be no place for excuses like this, after at the time of release being in business for half a decade. And come the f*** on, why does the head sculpt have to look so bad? This has to be one of the worst they've produced so far. You instantly lose the iconic half-oval silhouette, which is partially understandable due to the transformation. Actually, wait, no it isn't! The transformation is complete garbage to begin with! The eyes are painted, but they end up getting completely lost in the blue plastic surrounding them. Yeah, you thought Hound had invisible eyes? Well, this is way worse. And how the f*** is it possible to have an even worse level of Dull Surprise? Isn't Dull Surprise supposed to be pure unadulterated mediocrity? How can you be more mediocre than mediocrity? So yeah, easily the worst head sculpt I've come across from the company. Say what you will about the chibi-styled fembots, even if I disagree with you. At the very least, they made sense. The plastic had to be thicker, so they had to change the aesthetic overall to match the proportions. This doesn't have that excuse. Mirage's head isn't that hard to do. Whilst I was editing this video, I realized that I forgot to mention that he does come with a toy-accurate face that you can unscrew and rescrew, but considering the tolerances are quite terrible, I don't want to go through the hassle of unscrewing it. Furthermore, the face looks pretty awful, so yeah, best ignored. Practically everything this figure does is either messy, clunky, or both, in basically both modes. In fact, the only other thing I can commend is, or I suppose R would be more appropriate, the accessories. Despite having garbage storage in vehicle mode, they are both sculpted and painted beautifully, and they go a long way to making this design look awesome. You even get the same hinge that Hound got, and they've managed to pin it in there instead of just clipping it on. That's attention to detail. And this care and love permeates every aspect of the design, but again, it's bogged down by clumsiness. This isn't bad because the design is half-assed anything, it's bad because they up. Everyone f***s up, I get it, and as far as f***ups go, this isn't the worst the company has ever done. But I'd be lying if I said I thought it was okay for them to release a figure in this state. Even the articulation feels a little lackluster. The head is on a ball joint, which as per usual gets plenty of articulation, and the shoulders are also on ball joints, which I've demonstrated cannot be trusted. I guess it's nice if you want to recreate the mutilation scene from the comics. But putting that aside, it's probably the worst tolerance issue I've come across with the company since Blastoff's stress marks. The side panels sadly do not move out of the way completely, but they do get you just enough to access the bicep swivel. Unfortunately, there's no wrist swivel due to the way he transforms, but in this instance, I think it's fine. The waist thankfully swivels with no issues, despite the awful backpack. The hips work every which way, and are toleranced excellently tightly. Thigh swivels work fine, knees get you a solid 90, but unfortunately the feet are kinda shit. You've got a toe hinge and a ball joint, and neither of those work well enough to substitute a proper ankle tilt. Especially with the wheel spur. Seriously, who the f*** thought that was acceptable? I'd rather they just omit the tilt entirely, and instead focus on tightening up the weight distribution. There's a lot of smart articulation engineering that carries over from the other figures in the line, but again, it just falls flat thanks to sheer clumsiness. Now, size-wise, this figure is about the same size as every other Iron Factory carbot. As such, he displays incredibly well. If you have an Iron Factory display, then Mirage will do just fine, minus a few standing issues due to the heels. However, that's not really the point of Legends. The whole idea is that they're meant to be desk toys that you pick up and play at a moment's notice. It's the whole reason we don't get nearly as much elitism that's present in the third-party Masterpiece niche. There are far better Legends figures to get from Iron Factory and others, and let's be real here, if you're a big fan of Mirage, then there will be another attempt from another company. I've still got massive praise for Iron Factory, as they continue to release very few stinkers to this day, but in this instance, I just can't recommend this figure. You just know New Age or Magic Square is going to release a Mirage eventually, and I find it very difficult to believe it'll be nearly as bad as this. Mirage is bad, but he's definitely not the worst figure that Iron Factory have put out, but he is bad in a unique way. Much of the time, when I review a bad figure, it's for one of two reasons. It's because the designers clearly didn't give a shit, or because the aesthetic is causing problems with translating it into plastic form. This is probably the first time that the designers tried so desperately to get this right, yet failed miserably. As such, because of the philosophy behind this figure, I can't really give it the lowest score possible, and there are some things to like here, but it's definitely not passable. Now, the Siege version is also terrible, but I haven't spent enough time with it to determine whether I hate this more or that version more. Still, between this and Siege, it goes to show that Mirage has been done dirty, and I really hope he gets another shot in the near future. But until then, just skip this release. He simply isn't worth it. Oh, shit! I was going to review this in a Legendary Marathon! Ah, god damn it. Now I need to actually rearrange my entire schedule. Jeez, that was a mistake!